Now the day has come to finally make the Constitution in Philadelphia. So that's what this video is gonna focus on. Drafting the Constitution at Philadelphia. We are going to look at the delegates and some of the key issues. After a number of states elected delegates to the proposed Philadelphia Convention, Congress consented to give its approval to the meeting. It called upon all 13 states to send delegates to Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. So notice again, the key component to the convention in Philadelphia was to revise the Articles of Confederation, not to create a brand new set of government, which they did. Only Rhode Island refused to send delegates because Rhode Island was still not trusting any of the other states. So, of the 55 delegates who went to Philadelphia for the convention in the summer of 1787, all were white, all were male, and most were college educated. As a group, they were relatively young, so their average was early 40s. With few exceptions, they were far wealthier than the average American of their day. They were well acquainted with issues of law, and politics. A number of them were practicing lawyers, and many had helped to write their state constitution. Every state had their own constitution. The first order of business was to elect a presiding officer and decide whether or not to communicate with the public at large. Delegates voted to conduct their meetings in secret and say nothing to the public about their discussions until their work was completed. So the public had no idea what these delegates were talking about when they went to Philadelphia. So that's important. George Washington was unanimously elected chairperson. Benjamin Franklin, the elder statesman at age 81, provided a calming and unifying influence. The work in fashioning specific articles of the Constitution was directed by James Madison, who later we refer to as the father of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, and John Dickinson. While they represented different states, these convention leaders shared the common goal of wanting to strengthen the young nation. Several major leaders of the American Revolution were not at the convention. John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Thomas Paine were on diplomatic business abroad, so they weren't even at the convention. Samuel Adams and John Hancock were not chosen as delegates. Patrick Henry, who opposed any growth in federal power, refused to take part in the convention. So all different levels of stuff. So there is 3 key issues that I want to bring to the forefront because the leaders of the convention brought them to the forefront. Representation, slavery, and trade. Those were the three areas. Representation, especially divisive, was the issue of whether the larger states such as Virginia and Pennsylvania should have proportionally more representation in Congress than the smaller states such as New Jersey and Delaware. Madison's proposal, the Virginia Plan, favored the large states. It was countered by the New Jersey Plan, which favored the small states. The issue was finally resolved by a compromise solution. Roger Sherman of Connecticut proposed what was called the Connecticut Plan, or the Great Compromise. It provided for a two-house Congress. In the Senate, states would have equal representation, but in the House of Representatives, each state would be represented according to the size of their population. Second issue at hand was slavery. Two of the most contentious issues grew out of slavery. Should enslaved people be counted in slave populations? The delegates agreed to the 3/5 compromise, which counted each enslaved individual as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of determining a state's level of taxation and representation. Should the slave trade be allowed? So two questions that were on the table. The delegates decided to guarantee that slaves could be imported for at least 20 years longer, until 1808. Congress could vote to abolish the practice after that date if they wished. And the third key issue was the issue of trade. I don't know what's wrong with the lighting today. The northern states wanted a central government to regulate interstate commerce and foreign trade. The South was afraid that export taxes would be placed on its agricultural products such as tobacco and rice. The commercial compromise allowed Congress to regulate interstate and foreign commerce, including placing tariffs, taxes on foreign imports, but it's prohibiting placing taxes on any exports. So the presidency. The delegates debated over the president's term of office. Some argued that the chief executive should hold office for life. The delegates limited the president's term to 4 years, but with no limit on the number of terms. They also debated the method for electing a president. So I want to clarify the previous sentence. The 22nd Amendment to the Constitution puts a limit to the president's terms to 2 years, but originally, like we'll see this in FDR, there was no limit on the amount of terms that the president could run for. Rather than having voters elect a president directly, the delegates decided to assign to each state a number of electors equal to the total of that state's representatives and senators. The Electoral College system was instituted because the delegates feared that too much democracy might lead to mob rule. Finally, the delegates debated what powers to give the president. They finally decided to grant the president considerable power, including the power to veto acts of Congress. So what I just described to you is the Electoral College, which I'm not getting into, but there's quite a lot of debate on whether the Electoral College should be abolished or not. Feel free to do your own research. And ratification. On September 17th, 1787, after 17 weeks of debate, the Philadelphia Convention approved a draft of the Constitution to submit to the states for ratification. Anticipating opposition to the document, the framers, delegates, specifically specified that a favorable vote of only 9 states out of 13 would be required for ratification. Each state would hold popularity elected conventions to debate and vote on the proposed constitution. But this isn't good enough for the states, as we'll figure out in the next video when we talk about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. So, yeah.